In real life, when we use terms like identity, identical to, just the same as, we use these terms in lots of different ways, and we have lots of different ideas in mind when we use these terms. That's fine, but when we're talking about personal identity, we have a very particular sense of the term in mind, the sense of the term identity in mind. And just to get clear on what that sense is, let's distinguish it from other things that we might mean when we use the term identity. So there's identity in the sense of self-conception. I might say, gosh, this fascination with philosophy that I'm acquiring here threatens my identity as a poet, scientist, and gentleman. What does that mean? It means that I have this idea of myself, this self-conception, as poet, scientist, and gentleman. And now that I'm finding myself so interested in philosophy, it's hard for me to maintain this self-conception. Perfectly fine use of the term identity. It's not what we're talking about when we're talking about personal identity over time. Second, perfectly fine use of the term identity that's not the sense that we have in mind. Qualitative identity. So sometimes when we say things are identical, we mean that they just have a bunch of features in common. So more precisely, when philosophers talk about qualitative identity, they mean, well, two things are qualitatively identical when they share many of the same intrinsic features. What's an intrinsic feature? Well, an extrinsic feature of a thing is a feature of the thing that it has in virtue of the way that it relates to other things. An intrinsic feature is a feature that it has not in virtue of the way that it relates to other things. So an extrinsic feature of me is that I'm 20 feet away from a door. I have that feature because there's a door and I relate to it in the 20-foot away way. An intrinsic feature of me is that I am now bent at the hips. I have that feature not in virtue of the way that I relate to other things, but in virtue of how some of my parts relate to others of my parts. So we say that two things are qualitative, or just things are qualitatively identical when they have most of the same intrinsic features. Here is an example. This piece of paper is pretty much qualitatively identical to this piece of paper. They're not perfectly qualitatively identical because there's a little pattern of creases in this one that isn't there in this one. So qualitative identity is a matter of degree. Strict identity, on the other hand, is not a matter of degree. Strict identity is the relation that obtains between a thing and itself and nothing else in the world. So when I say this thing is strictly identical to this thing, I mean that they are one and the same thing. To put another way, that the thing I referred to in the first instance of using the term this thing is the very thing I referred to in the second instance of using the term this thing. So this piece of paper may be qualitatively identical to this piece of paper, but it's not strictly identical to this piece of paper. This piece of paper is only strictly identical to this piece of paper. As a practice, have a go at answering a couple of questions. Focus on this piece of paper and this piece of paper. Are they qualitatively identical? Are they strictly identical? I take it that you could answer the first question. The piece of paper I referred to the first time is qualitatively identical to the piece of paper I referred to the second time, pretty much. You can't answer the second question because you don't know if I switched them. In fact, I didn't switch them, so the answer was yes. But you needed to know whether I switched them to answer that second question. Okay, now have a go at answering some questions in the multiple choice form.